Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dee Dee Petri, President and CEO of the Olmsted Network, and I'm delighted to see you this evening for another in our ongoing series of educational programs focused on Olmsted work and values. Tonight, we will have a virtual introduction to the great city of Buffalo with a particular look at the Elmwood Historic District, thanks to our speaker, Clinton Brown. But before I introduce him, I want to invite you to join us in person in Buffalo for a special Halloween visit, October 30 to November 1, so that you can see firsthand not only what we'll discuss today, but much, much more. Don't miss the opportunity to stay in the famous Richardson Hotel, part of the National Historic Landmark, formerly known as the Buffalo State Asylum, designed by Henry Hobson Richardson and Frederick Law Olmsted. You can join us for an opening dinner in the Glessner Room, where you can meet our speaker, Clinton Brown, in person, as well as Paris Roselli, president of the Richardson Olmsted Complex, Mark Mistretta, head of the Niagara region for the New York State Park System, and Frank Kowski, legendary scholar of Olmsted and Vox in Buffalo. The next morning, we'll take a walking sunrise tour of the Richardson Olmsted campus, followed by a trolley tour of the historic Forest Lawn Cemetery. From there, it's off to the Buffalo Olmsted Parks to hear from their leaders before we tour the park and conclude with a dinner at the Terrace Restaurant overlooking Hoyt Lake in Delaware Park. And on Friday, we have an optional visit to Niagara Falls. So let me tell you, you don't want to miss it. You can register on our website, and I hope you will do so. But as I said, to whet your appetite, we are honored tonight to have with us preservation architect Clinton Brown, who will introduce us to Elmwood, Buffalo's Parkway neighborhood. Clinton is an author and an architect who founded and directs Clinton Brown Company Architecture. He's a graduate of Franklin and Marshall College, the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, and the University of Virginia School of Architecture. A fellow of the American Institute of Architects, he has taught at the SUNY Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning, and he's a frequent speaker about historic preservation and Main Street revitalization. It was Clinton's firm that nominated Elmwood for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And he is also a gubernatorial appointee to the board overseeing the rehabilitation of the Richardson Olmsted campus. And if you don't have it in your library already, I highly recommend the inspiration for tonight's talk, Clinton's great book, Elmwood, The Rise, Decline, and Renewal of Buffalo's Parkway Neighborhood, a Model for America's Cities, published by City of Light Publishing Co. We will hear from Clinton for about 40 minutes and then take Q&A from you all. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. And with that, welcome to Clinton.
Thank you, Dee Dee, and all of you here this evening. Welcome to Buffalo, New York, in Western New York, the home of Olmsted's greatest vision that was made manifest by Buffalo business leaders over the course of a generation. I grew up stuck in the same zip code all my life in this neighborhood, and suddenly it became okay. And as it became okay, and as Buffalo changed its zoning laws to not recognize the historic character of a place, the threat came for development that was not compatible with the park and parkway setting and with Elmwood's historic character as a streetcar suburb. And I had to learn how to explain why Elmwood is important, because National Register listing does not do that. One needs an active management of an everyday living heritage landscape, which people who care for Olmsted Parks know is the right thing to do. Can we translate that into caring well for the communities around the Olmsted Parks? So I had to go back to the beginning to understand how Elmwood District came to be and how we can go forward to take better care of it going forward. And that became a book because people don't read National Register nominations as much as people who write them would like them to be read. I'd like to start by acknowledging the first people to live here as long as 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. The indigenous people who made this place habitable were the eventually called the Haudenosaunee, members of the Iroquois Confederation, and they lived in a harmonious way with the earth, building bark houses like this one, long houses, living communally. However, for an architectural historian, they left no buildings about which to write. However, you will see in the plan Joseph Ellicott brings up to start Buffalo as a place for settlement, incorporates the streets that they left. And of course, as a people, they are still here, very much here. Those of us who are settlers, I hope will begin to reconcile with the people of the First Nations. The first settler to build a house of substance in Buffalo was Martin Middaugh, who arrived in 1794. And he selected a site by Buffalo Creek, which was where Buffalo would begin. You see his house here. It's where he died in 1824. The bateaux that were used to navigate the water, the relationship of the water, the cleared land, those are animals in a farm, and trees. And in the background is Fort Erie, Ontario, Canada. So we're in Western New York. We're at the Canadian border. And people lived randomly in the landscape as the settlers first arrived. And then in 1804, Joseph Ellicott, who'd been through this area before to measure and survey land boundaries after the American Revolutionary War, once all the land claims from that war were settled and the Native Americans gave up much of their rights to their land, he laid out a visionary plan shown here in a later drawing of a place that he wanted to make attractive to people, settlers heading west who had other opportunities or over where to stop and grow their fortune. Here you see on the bank of the Niagara River, the Buffalo Creek is at the bottom of the drawing with a tributary. There is a public square in the New England style, and around it are squares associated with commerce and democracy. The square grid goes back to Miletus in ancient Greece, which was associated with democracy and commerce. Every point was roughly equal from every other point. And radial streets. The radial streets are associated with Native American paths. The one going to the top of the drawing is the road between Batavia in central New York and access to Lake Erie here at Buffalo. And he named these major streets after Native tribes in this drawing. The dense core of the inner lots is surrounded by a more open core of larger lots, which were called farm lots. And Elmwood will grow to the north in the former farm lots. Here is the first known survey of Elmwood, and it gives me the opportunity to show the frame of what is then mostly forest. These were plotted amidst the network of trails that already existed and the natural boundaries of the waterways. Going diagonally across the top of the drawing is Scajaquada Creek. Scajaquada Creek being a natural boundary at the time, separating south of the creek and north of the creek. South of the creek were the Senecas, north of the creek were the Tonawandas historically. The road coming from the upper right corner, going diagonally down to the center of the bottom of the drawing, is the route from Batavia to Buffalo and back, connecting the Great Lake of Lake Erie with the Finger Lakes region of New York. And where it bends, there was a spring, and that's why it bent, because it was a place to get a drink of water as one traveled to and from. The road extending north disappeared over time, yet I think you'll see later that Olmsted used that road to mark his future parkway, Chapin Parkway. And again, at that same juncture, there's a road that goes across the middle of the drawing. That's Ferry Street. That is the shortest route from that spring, from that Batavia Road to the west to cross the Niagara River into Canada. The boundary of Olmsted's Elmwood is set by these roads, and on the west or the left of the drawing by that curving line that is the mile strip reservation. That line is a mile distant from the shore of the Niagara River, and it was land given up by the Senecas in reparation for the Devil's Hole massacre of British troops that required them to give up a mile on either side of the Niagara River to the British. The British lost it in the American Revolutionary War. New York got it. But the point is that it is a boundary because the area that was in the Niagara Reservation became Black Rock, was platted earlier than Buffalo, and this line was the backyard of Black Rock, as well as the backyard of lots that you can see are fronting Main Street and going back to that line. And this is where Elmwood will eventually come in. The genius of Olmsted will be evident in what he called the avenue, because he knitted the future Ellicott grid with the Black Rock grid in what he called the avenue. Finally, where those roads coalesce around that spring is where some of the inspiration for Olmsted's Park and Parkway system took place, because that's where Forest Lawn Cemetery, Buffalo area's first rural cemetery, is made in 1849. So this is Elmwood when it is all forest and impenetrable. And the history, the story will go from forest to farm to nursery to streetcar suburb. Why? Because almost 200 years ago, this month and next month, DeWitt Clinton, shown here pouring the waters of Lake Erie into New York Harbor, opened the Erie Canal. And through the Erie Canal came all the people yearning to breathe free and move west, and the commodities of the American Midwest flowing east to markets along the East Coast as well as across Europe and the world. It was this that turned Buffalo into such a boom town, and yet Buffalo business leaders, just like Joseph Ellicott before them, realized they had to make a place that was competitive to attract the people and the capital to continue to grow Buffalo's prominence. It's the 8th or 10th largest city in America at the time after the Civil War, when Buffalo business leaders, not the mayor, not as we do things today, professional planners, Buffalo business leaders brought in Frederick Law Olmsted at age 46, shown here in 1868, to ask him, where should we put Buffalo's Central Park? We're competitive with New York. We have to have a Central Park. And after spending a couple of days in Buffalo at a gathering of Buffalo business leaders, he said, gentlemen, you should have all three parks. So in this drawing of Olmsted's Park and Parkway system, at the top, we see Delaware Park. It was the great park. He called it the park. Extending southeast to the right is Humboldt Parkway, the subject of controversy right now over what to do with it, leading to the Parade, which was a park where soldiers actually did practice. On the left-hand side of the drawing, to the west, dropping down from that park is Lincoln Parkway, leading to Soldiers Place. Soldiers Place is the center of Elmwood, just like Ellicott's public square was the center of his scheme, seen down at the bottom of the drawing. And he put, Olmsted deliberately called it Soldiers Place to put the soldiers at the center of these parks that were meant to heal, partly heal the trauma of the post-Civil War era. The Buffalo business leaders said, we want free public parks for everyone, and Olmsted delivered. The two other parkways are Chapin and Bidwell. Bidwell to the left leads to the avenue, and you can see there, if you're have a graphic sensibility that the Black Rock grid is at one angle and the Elmwood grid is at another. And he gracefully, as an urban designer, credit may not get too often, knit those two grids together into the great avenue. Then that leads to Front Park, a park that overlooks where Lake Erie becomes the headwater for the Niagara River that flows north over Niagara Falls, where he designs a Niagara Reservation State Park. So that's the geography and the geometry. What about the character? At the same time this is going on, Buffalo business leaders are seeking to attract a state psychiatric hospital. They called it an asylum when the term was not anathema as it is today. So we don't use asylum today, but the intent at the time was this was an asylum. Thomas Story Kirkbride designing a therapeutic landscape, one whose arrangement would be Edenic, in effect, helping people who were deranged live and regain their arrangement of their minds in a healthy way and be released. This was a place to be treated and released, unlike other state hospitals at the time. So this value of creating a healthy and healing place at Buffalo State Asylum in Elmwood going on at the same time, plus Olmsted's familiarity with the 1849 forest lawn, which is off to the left of this photo, were part of what values were embodied in the creation of Elmwood that we seek to retrieve today. And here is on the left, a map showing in black the original Ellicott vision of making Buffalo a place worth living in and investing in. And then to the top of that drawing, the outline of the Olmsted Parks. This 1877 atlas shows the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane being created. It shows Olmsted's armature, green armature, Bidwell Parkway, Chapin Parkway, Lincoln Parkway, all sort of the forecourt, almost the forecourt to the great park, the park with the Great Lake, and Forest Lawn is to the right. So this is the setting in terms of the physical setting and the cultural setting in which Elmwood grows within those embracing arms of that green armature. So in terms of the population, it is a post-Civil War period of healing. It is a post-Civil War period of suburbanization. It is the opportunity for people of increasing wealth to grow ornamental trees and shrubs, and Elmwood grew those trees and shrubs for the city and beyond. The J.B. Eaton and Company nursery, greenhouses there were written up in nursery journals internationally as being internationally significant. And you can see Mr. Manley on the right in his advertisement has the most perfect specimens for streets, parks, and private grounds and gardens. He was in the right place at the right time because suddenly, due to the transformation of technology and high-speed rail, this is the first version of high-speed rail, this plays a tremendous role in the transformation of the forest into the Elmwood district because a 15-minute walk is now extended in time across a larger geography. So a man could work downtown taking the streetcar to the job. A woman had her version, however wealthy she was, of her own estate on which she had fruit trees for where she raised her children. She often had a part-time helper working for her, and the rapid transit made that life possible such that in 1902, the journal Commerce said nature and man seem to have worked harmoniously in the creation of what is known as Buffalo's Elmwood district. So it was branded as being this coalition of humankind and nature to make a desirable place in which to live. And it boomed. So by 1880, here's a bird's eye view of Elmwood. Allentown, the first suburb of downtown Buffalo, is in the lower part of this image. You can potentially work out on the upper right The location of all those trees is forest lawn, also an Edenic place of eternal rest. To the left, upper left, you can see the projection of what the Buffalo State Asylum would be. And that vacant land in between is what will fill up with people in a process that I think is fascinating. Women have a huge role in the creation of Elmwood, in particular, Elizabeth Miller. Here's my neighborhood. And this is a drawing of the Elmwood Avenue before it connected to downtown, which is another story. But you can see Elizabeth Miller owns the big block in the lower left, a farm that she has bought. And she's already started subdividing on the other side of Elmwood those 24 lots into houses that were billed as front footage. You would buy so many front foot on the street because the street would have utilities, indoor water delivery, indoor sanitation to the public sewer, eventually gas and electricity. And this is how Elmwood came to be, with women developers, women who designed their own houses. And you'll see in a moment how this was marketed to women, an era of women's liberation. This is Elmwood Avenue as that emerged. It is a tree-lined street of gracious urbanity. It's a dirt road or macadam, crushed stone, and the place is very gracious. You can see, if you look carefully enough, that there are street lights. It is safe to walk in this case, bicycle in the street, although they're generous sidewalks. Only one block in Elmwood looks like this today. And then, due to the rapid transit, and in 1890, the streetcar system became electrified, we had an impact that was both positive and negative. It was positive because it brought more opportunity for more people to afford to live in Elmwood. But the negative side is it began a commercialization because the Elmwood houses' front lawns that you'd seen in the previous slide were converted into storefronts with an apartment above, which changed the original residential character. But those houses that they fronted can be seen in Elmwood today. And meanwhile, there were new houses being opened, 1 or 2 per day for about 10 years. And the pitch was that you could live in the streetcar suburb with all kinds of opportunities to live well. The folks who were being most avidly sought were women who wanted to have a safe place for their families and state-of-the-art living lifestyles. They were sold houses that had 2 flats. You live in one flat and the other flat pays your mortgage, so you live debt-free. They had built-in refrigerators, outside sleeping rooms, awnings, electric and gas fixtures, tile bathrooms providing perfect sanitation. You know, their parents or grandparents had outhouses in downtown Buffalo and lived in tenements. Screens, storm windows, soundproof walls, you didn't have to hear your neighbors, clothes chutes, modern plumbing, and ideal heating arrangements. What's not to like? And this place was part of Buffalo's development around the turn of the last century, where the Chamber of Commerce is advertising these fire-belching factories turning out everything for everybody across America. At the same time, their workers could get refreshment in, this is an image of the casino at Hoyt, what's now called Hoyt Lake, the lake in what is now called Delaware Park. So the Chamber of Commerce understood the same thing that Joseph Ellicott did 200 years before, that the Buffalo business leaders bringing in Olmsted, that Buffalo had to compete by attracting workers and capital. And the parks were a key portion of that in a way that you don't think of Buffalo or any other business leaders seeing today. Although we'll see Joan Moser changed that. Here's an image of a portion of the Elmwood district. In this case, north is to the left and west is to the top. We see Soldiers Place. And if you look along the line of Lincoln Parkway straight across, you'll see three pink buildings. The one overlooking Soldiers Place in the corner of the quadrant, the southwest quadrant, is Buffalo Seminary. It was founded in 1851 by the same business leaders who brought in Olmsted, who wanted their daughters to be as well educated as their sons. And Buffalo Seminary had begun 50 years before and moved to Elmwood because that's where the market was. And there were Buffalo billionaires around that circle sending their daughters there. But they also were attracting girls from all over. They said to the parents, rest assured, we're far enough away on Soldiers Place from the clangor of the Elmwood streetcar at the north of the drawing, far enough away from the clangor of the Elmwood streetcar that their studies are not disturbed. Looking left to the next big pink building there, that's School 56. A public school opens in Elmwood. And then looking further to the left in the drawing, there is the irregularly shaped pink building. That's Miss Narden's Academy. That was founded in 1857. Miss Narden was part of a group of Catholic nuns who were brought in with Bishop Timon, the first and really most brilliant Roman Catholic bishop in Western New York, to educate, in this case, girls, daughters. Narden Lower School has become co-ed, but the high school is still one of the oldest all-girls high schools in the United States. So this is a place of education and opportunity for women that no one knew about before we did the homework on why Elmwood is significant. But then we hit a sort of sour time. We have the 1920s and the Great Depression. It wipes out so many of the Buffalo business leaders' fortunes who created the great estates in Elmwood, who brought in progressive ideas of caring for workers, who brought in progressive ideas of education for women. And here is an example of what we are recently learning the devastation of, and that is the so-called red line map. This is the 1937 home loan map. In the upper left quadrant, all green, is Elmwood. There you see the irregular outline of Delaware Park. But so much of the rest of the city, particularly the historic Black neighborhood shown in the lower portion, which was a Black neighborhood going back to Buffalo's origins in the 1810s and 20s, is ruled a place that's not worth investing in. This was devastating to regenerating Buffalo based on the history of its attracting people to make their fortunes here, or even just make a decent life. We have the rise of the automobile. This is Elmwood Avenue at Cleveland Avenue. This is the opportunity to see the original houses in the background, in front of which were placed these 1910s and 20s storefronts to attract shoppers getting on and off the streetcars. This happens to be the neighborhood where I was a crossing guard. I know it pretty well. But by the time I was a crossing guard, there were no more gasoline pumps on the sidewalk, as you see in this picture. But what they show is that the automobile has taken over the streetcar and walkable nature of the neighborhood. This was devastating to streetcar suburbs and the city as it was known for the first 150 years. Here's, this will make your heart stop. As a Olmsted Park aficionado, here are these amazing elm trees being chopped down to provide a wider street and street side parking. These are the houses that represented the Elmwood that you saw in that pre-streetcar picture a few slides ago. And this is going on in 1940. At the last streetcar in Buffalo ran in closed in 1950, and public transportation was shifted to buses. Finally, I think the reason we're here, frankly, is the expressway cut through Delaware Park. Running across the top of this image from right and left is the Skagit Expressway, New York 198. the interchange that all were built in Delaware Park. This is Delaware Park. We're directly overhead of Forest Lawn Cemetery, which you see the curvilinear road system. To the left is the lake, since named Hoyt Lake after the state assembly member who caused the cleanup of it. Forest Avenue, on which the asylum sits. On the other side of, you can see there, Lincoln Parkway is the place where one coming up Delaware Avenue would emerge into the park. Skagakwa Expressway is 4 lanes of at-grade highway that literally cut off Elmwood from its reason for being. You can see the outlines of the holes of the golf course that is on Delaware Park, even to this day. A rather benign use, I have to say. If it weren't for that golf course, the city probably wouldn't have taken care of the park at all. But Jack Friedlander and other city Department of Public Works people were avid golfers, and that golf course got great care. So this, to my mind, 1962, I'm a young person who remembers this construction, remembers going to Delaware Park because on my bicycle at night, because there was no one else there. It was a scary urban park because it had been cut off for its reason for being. And then we're now going to talk about the renewal of Elmwood. And there are a couple of factors. Buffalo State Asylum became Buffalo Psychiatric Center and did not need the therapeutic landscape and farm and gardens that were key to its success as an asylum. And they were given over to Buffalo State College, now called Buffalo State University, a normal school. That normal school attracted people from New York City. Frankly, this is the furthest away you could get from your parents in New York City in the New York State system. And it attracted so many great people. Our now retiring mayor is one of them. To diversify and reinvent the culture that was baked into the Elmwood district at the beginning. This has been a huge factor in pulling together nature, commerce, culture that make Elmwood so special. At the top of the chain, just like the Buffalo business leaders the Dutch business leaders who brought in Joseph Ellicott, the Buffalo business leaders who brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, these business leaders began the revival of Buffalo. To the left is Will Clarkson. He comes in to run the family business Graphic Controls. He and Frank Kowski, who I hope you all will read his book about Buffalo. It's magnificent, Buffalo Park and Parkways. He and Will Clarkson and others formed the Buffalo Architectural Guidebook. MIT Press publishes it. It's still a state-of-the-art book, not focusing on what Buffalo lost, but focusing on what Buffalo still had. Charles Beveridge writes a seminal essay about Olmsted's Park and Parkway system, telling people in Buffalo something they didn't know they had. I run into today people who grew up in the Delaware Park neighborhood, the Parkside area designed by the Olmsted firm, and they had no idea growing up that it was an Olmsted production, and I was one of them. In fact, one person who grew up in Lincoln Parkway told me recently, I had no idea it was named after Abraham Lincoln. So Charles Beveridge was a key player. He's not pictured here, but you will know who he is and why he's important. He's important to us. The centerpiece picture is Stanford Lipsey. He's Warren Buffett's best friend for years from Omaha. Warren Buffett buys the Buffalo News and sends Stan to Buffalo to run it. Stan falls in love with Buffalo, but he doesn't see a clear vision for its future. He told me that I haven't found any evidence this is true, but I can't not believe him. He told me he brought in McKinsey Company to say, what should we do about Buffalo now that Warren's here? And they said, well, look at all the magnificent architecture. Can you imagine a business consulting firm telling the most powerful businessman in Western New York, focus on your historic assets? So Stan goes on to save the Darwin Martin House. He and his wife, Judy, invest millions into that, bring everybody together to make the Darwin Martin House really, I think, the most important restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction of a Frank Lloyd Wright house in America. to fruition. And then he wants to build an architecture center to tell the world about Buffalo's architecture and parks, and creates what is now known as the Lipsey Architecture Center, Buffalo. Here he is standing at the railing of the former asylum that is now fully restored. Those of you coming to Buffalo, I hope everyone will come to Buffalo for the pop-up. We'll stay here. You'll see that stairway. And he was the one who convinced Governor Pataki to give $100 million to fix the National Historic Landmark, former Buffalo State Asylum. And he did it. And it is a work still in progress. I'm one of the early board members. We've only been into it since 2008. It took 30 years to build the place. It's going to take 30 years to rehabilitate it. And finally, the reason we're here today at the Olmsted Network is Joan Bozer. Joan Bozer arrives in Buffalo with her new doctor husband while he takes a position here in the Buffalo medical community. And she is appalled at the condition of the Olmsted Parks and takes it very personally and founds the Buffalo Friends of Olmsted Parks, Buffalo Olmsted Parks organization that becomes the Olmsted Network more recently. She also was an ardent historic preservationist. She was a civic leader. I categorize her as a business person because she was the one who started the Buffalo Free Trade Network. She gave a prize in honor of her father to the certain businesses each year, the Kendig Prize. Really one of the most extraordinary people one could hope to meet in one's life. So a special shout out to Joan for bringing us together this evening for the purpose of continuing, in my view, her work. And then there's grassroots efforts. This is Michael Attardo. He's a tailor in a shop on Elmwood. And he starts sweeping the street, sidewalk and street in front of his store because there's no one else to do it. Somebody else notices that, and he said, we've got to take care of our own neighborhood. And that is the founding of what it was called Forever Elmwood. It's now called the Elmwood Village Association. It is the organization that got Elmwood designated a top 10 neighborhood in America. Here, Michael and his wife and children are celebrating painted garbage cans on the Art of Garbage Cans Day in May 1996. He just passed away last year. And it was this grassroots effort that he initiated that led others to work at the Elmwood Bidwell Farmers Market put together by Forever Elmwood. Here we are in the blue tents selling the concept of creating the National Register of Historic Places nomination. Frankly, there was a personal interest. My wife and I needed the historic tax credit to fix up our Elmwood house. But the map on the right shows at that time the census tracts that were eligible because despite Elmwood's historic wealth, its residents weren't sufficiently wealthy not to need tax credits. So it was business power, it was grassroots power, and look at the transformation. This is an aerial photograph of Elmwood in the 1950s on the left. You can see how it was denuded of its trees in the quest to commercialize and accommodate parking. Look at all the parking areas that used to be people's front lawns. And then this is a recent picture of Elmwood and a church, Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church, one of the first suburban churches in Buffalo that is now converted into the original congregation, which still worships there. I went to a funeral last Saturday, but also accommodates apartments, rental space, a community kitchen. And this is an amazing, amazing example of adaptive reuse of one's inheritance. The early photographs of this show the church in the middle of nowhere because it was one of the first suburban churches in Elmwood. So what do we do next? How do we begin to deal with the notion of taking better care of this inheritance? I've learned so much being a part of the Olmsted Network from people like you who are caring for Olmsted Parks. And it became inspiring to me to think of Elmwood as being a city in a park or a park in a city. Can we take the same curatorial approach to the art of park making, to the art of village making? So I invented the notion of thinking about an everyday living heritage landscape. It is different than a cultural landscape. It's different than a historic district. It's an everyday living heritage landscape that could be, through an Elmwood Conservancy, taken care of with a curatorial approach rather than the planning and zoning approaches that, or historic preservation approaches, frankly, that don't work right now to bring the necessary vitality. People have no idea what I'm talking about until I mention Chautauqua Institution. This is on the shores of Lake Chautauqua in southwestern New York. It is an exemplar. It's a National Historic Register district. It is an example of, from its original, not streetcar, but steamboat. It was a steamboat community, one accessed from railroads to steamboats on Lake Chautauqua. It is a state-of-the-art commercial residential mix. It is a place of education and recreation that is world famous. And I think it's a great opportunity to think of Elmwood or other similar Olmsted Park neighborhoods in terms of blending park and village, park and city. These scenes are the way it is. I hope you'll visit and see. We're trying at the Richardson Center to take the same approach. This is the front door to the Richardson Hotel that I hope many of you will come to see. This is a particularly compelling picture for me because it is taken just after the opening, the finishing of a project that I was part of with the board since 2008. And you see in the upper right-hand corner some celestial object. It could be the moon, it could be a comet, blessing this place, just like Joseph Ellicott's radial street grid related to the heavens foretold, I think, what this place could be. So I think Elmwood deserves an Elmwood District Conservancy. I think that all of us can relate that to this story, because our quest to revitalize our inheritance really, I think, has to be based on the nobility with which it was created. It was a time, despite our challenges with the First Nations, despite our racial inheritance, we can build places worth living in, places of reconciliation, and Olmsted's ideas, Olmsted's parks are absolutely crucial, I think, to understanding and actually doing that. So thank you for your time and attention for this tour of Olmsted's Elmwood. Here we're looking at the image of Soldier's Place in the spring, because when the trees develop, you will not see the buildings. Buffalo Seminary is near the top of the picture. The parkway going off to the left is Bidwell Parkway. General Bidwell was a soldier from a general from Buffalo who was killed in the war. The parkway to the left, I think, is that trail we saw in the 1820 survey that led from that spring at Main and West Ferry to the Tonawanda Reservation on the other side of the creek. I will give a great prize to whoever finds the Marsden Davy survey commissioned for Frederick Law Olmsted in 1868-69. I believe there were 2 copies made. No one knows where either of them are. As an architect and urban designer, Olmsted fan, I would love to see the canvas that Olmsted had when he arrived here in 1868, on which he painted his park and parkway system that gave birth to Elmwood. And this, to me, is the core of it. I believe that original Native American trail was the genesis of Chapin Parkway. Of course, Bidwell was its opposite that connected to the avenue. Read all about it in the book. Come to Buffalo in a couple of weeks and get that tour that Dee Dee promised. And I look forward to answering any of your questions or comments. Thank you for your time and attention. Dee Dee?
Terrific, Clinton. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and much to think about. We will see if you have engendered some questions. But in the meantime, let's just sort of start out on something that you had mentioned. Obviously, right now in Buffalo, there is an ongoing debate about those expressways and what to do with them. Cap them, remove them, basically produce boulevards, all of those, I think, options. And you've got both going through Delaware Park and then obviously the destruction of Humboldt Parkway. The Olmsted Network has been very happy to engage, well, unhappy, but happy to engage in saying that we would like to find a way to bring back the Humboldt Parkway. And we were certainly heartened by the recent decision brought on by the East Side Parkway Coalition's litigation to get a temporary restraining order as they continue to try to find a way to bring back a full Parkway. Why don't you give us your thoughts on that and where we are on that now? Just bring everybody up to speed who's attending tonight.
Well, thank you, Dee Dee. Just a little history. And by the way, you'd be very proud of your colleagues at the Buffalo Olmsted Parks Conservancy because they have been fighting for restoration of the parks to overcome the devastation by the automobile. In the case of Humboldt Parkway, it's an issue of social and environmental equity. When in the World War II and post-World War II era, there was white flight due to the redlining, as you saw in the 1937 map, and the natural causes of growth and sprawl, a suburbanization based not on the streetcar, but on the automobile. We still had the need as a community to connect people working downtown with where they lived in these new suburbs. Their 15-minute drive extended over geography that had been former farmland. So the process was happening again, but the net result was the most convenient place in the terms of the 50s and 60s to put a highway was to take out Humboldt Park, a parkway designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. And the people who were moving in there, people of color who were rising through the middle class, had no power to stop it because the juggernaut of federal subsidization of post-World War II families, which was obviously a good thing, could not be balanced with the needs of people who were not of that group. The net result was a viaduct cutting off the neighborhood on either side of the Humboldt Parkway that had been there for 100 years or more, 100 years. And today, that's the place of the highest asthma rates. People living on either side of that 40-foot viaduct with 6 lanes of highway, of people driving, I have to admit, the speed limit or more. The state's answer to the community members who formed the coalition and worked with others to bring this case to the public attention, the answer by New York State and the Department of Transportation was, well, we can cap a portion of the viaduct. We can put virtually a roof over it. It will be deep enough for small trees. And it will cost $1 billion to do half of the restoration as they saw it, without having gone through, according to people who are now suing and won in court a week ago Friday, did not follow the proper procedures for regarding environmental quality review, which we call it here in New York State. Federally, it's Section 106. You may not know about that, which has stopped almost every other highway that from going through an Olmsted Park for over a generation. Here we've got the other opportunity, because it turns out, based on the research done by the opponents of the state's plan, that for $500 million, 500 million, you can remove the highway, fill the hole, and put in a restored Humboldt Parkway, which they've done they're doing in Syracuse, they've done in Rochester and many other cities. The state-of-the-art thinking is removal of highways in favor of parks and people. So this is something worth watching. Meanwhile, Buffalo Olmsted Parks Conservancy was the leader in doing the same thing with the Scajaquada Expressway that, as you saw, decapitated Delaware Park to devastating impacts. They've been a little bit taken over by the states deciding on the social equity portion of restoring Humboldt Park. And it's a fascinating story worth keeping an eye out. You should also note the Olmsted Network has been at the forefront of trying to have an informed discussion about this, show what's going on in other cities, and educate people about the opportunities to go forward. So how's that? I think it's a pretty interesting topic.
Thank you very much for that, Clinton. And we do urge people to take a look at our YouTube channel. We did do a webinar looking at roadway renewal challenges in a variety of cities, as Clinton said, Milwaukee, Buffalo. So please do take a look at that, because as you have heard, many cities are faced with the opportunities presented, and we want to take from the best practices around the country. But I got a few more questions for you. One of them, Clinton, is, was there any particular energizing event that prompted the renewal to begin in Elmwood?
Yes, it was a coming together of forces from several sectors. I can't say there's one precipitating moment. The city administration over time could not deal with keeping the city up as much as the new residents brought in by Buffalo University at Buffalo, huge magnets of very talented people who fall in love with Buffalo and stay and expect more. So that's a factor. People started taking care of their own neighborhoods. In fact, a group called Voice Buffalo of ministers from all backgrounds across Buffalo did their part in stepping up and saying, we need better sanitation. That's why we got garbage totes. You think that's not important? That's very important, because it reduces rats, cleans up garbage, and fewer workers are hurt lifting garbage totes when garbage cans when a machine can do it. It is the blocking and tackling that was done by grassroots people. Michael Attardo sweeping the front of his storefront. It was also, Buffalo was in a transition. It's still trying to figure out how to be a post-industrial city. Only one or two cities on the Great Lakes have figured that out. Hamilton, Ontario is one of them. They have Royal Botanical Gardens there, a key feature. They still have steel making, but it's not the only game in town. Buffalo has struggled to overcome its industrial past. We have another really internationally significant project going on called the River Line. If you Google the River Line, you'll see a state-of-the-art environmental restoration of recreation in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Buffalo that will be attractive to all. This is relatively recent. It wasn't the case a generation ago. So, and then Joan Boser. One can't underestimate Joan Boser as someone who was angry, but never made you feel that you were the cause of the problem. In fact, she made you feel you were part of the solution. And just an extraordinary human being. We all would like to become like Joan Boser's in trying to move our communities forward. And look what she did on a national level with what is now Olmsted Network. So I think there was a coalescence of change of outsiders. The insiders had pretty much been beaten up after World War II with the demise of the industrial prowess that came from the Erie Canal and was just not able to keep up with the demographic trends. But we were state of the art with all this inheritance. And I think Joan was the first, and Austin Fox, a high school teacher, probably the most prominent high school teacher in Western New York, was an avid historic preservationist. Everybody listened to Austin Fox. They articulated an argument for restoring our reason for being based on our inheritance, because it was about health and wellness and living well in the city.
Well, I love your reference to Joan and making us all part of the solution. That indeed is the philosophy of the Olmsted Network. So here's a question for you from Alan Oberst, who we all know is very engaged with these matters. And he says, with some concern, that even though many of us appreciate Elmwood, you nevertheless tend to see development schemes that may wipe out heritage or build out of scale. And so his question to you, Clinton, is, I mean, given the fact that we all appreciate this place and given the fact that there are constant challenges to them, what's going to make us turn this around so that we don't have to continually have these problems?
Alan, that's the genesis of the book. The genesis of the book is to take Joan Broser's approach of educating people about how Elmwood came to be and why it's significant. Number one, we still have to do that. Number two, how do we work together to take better care of it? Because we have a number of groups who each have their own point of view. I call for an Elmwood Conservancy, which is a place where all groups would work together with the city. The form-based code, Alan, is a failure, absolute failure. I recommend against it in any historic district because the form-based code has a predetermined, generally architect or genius urban planner approach to making cities that does not fit either the requirements of modern real estate or the character of historic neighborhoods. So the question is how, after having two generations from 1920 to 1990 of no growth in Elmwood, how do we attract growth and investment in a way that retains historic character? I think Chautauqua is the best example most people are familiar with where they do that. They have continuous growth and renewal. And the argument over the amphitheater there resulted in a better result than it would have otherwise. But if you're a Buffalonian here today, you'd be looking at Douglas Jamal's development on the corner of Bidwell and Elmwood. Even though Soldiers Place is the designed center of Elmwood, the actual center is Elmwood and Bidwell Crossing. There at the heart, he is trying to do something that retains historic character, adds new value, creates a big enough footprint to be affordable to build in a place that attracts a rent because it's a good place to live. I think that's the canary in the coal mine. And while, again, it was controversial, we, I think, want him to be successful because that's a model that could point the way forward rather than the demolition and big bulky blocks that we see that are favored by the zone-based code, building code. So thank you for your advocacy, Alan. You're one of those people shining a light on these things. And that's my answer, is a book of 300 or 200, 300 pages, 357 images to try to make that case.
Well, we'll go from the cosmic to a little bit more specific. We have a question about, do you know who the architect was for PS 30 on Elmwood between West Ferry and Breckenridge? Apparently no longer there.
It's my school. It's the school I attended. I loved it because as a kindergartner, you were in a room with 12, 14-foot ceilings. You felt your brain had no barriers to really growing. I spent a lot of my time in the basement cleaning erasers, however, because I was not a good student. But I raised the flag and I was a crossing guard on Elmwood. So I literally lived on Elmwood when most students were confined to the schoolroom during the day. But I have no idea who the architect was. It was the first building of significance to be demolished to form Elmwood's nascent historic preservation concerns, namely Wendy Pierce, another amazing woman who stepped up at the time. And it created the renewal of the M&T branch bank, which is soon to be National Register eligible. So it shows the mixed bag that these issues are and why we need to have a good discussion that I inform people about how to do the right thing. Unfortunately, School 30 was never in a historic photograph labeled. It was labeled as School 56, which it wasn't. So it's a great mystery, and that is something that brings us down to earth.
Well, I want to just say thank you once again to Clinton Brown for an absolutely fascinating conversation. We have taped this so that those of you who'd like to listen to it again, you have that opportunity. We do indeed hope to see many of you October 30th through November 1 for our pop-up trip to Buffalo, where we will get to connect with Clinton in person and to look at this remarkable city with so many wonderful opportunities, with the Conservancy idea that we've heard today very much front and center. And another shout out to Joan Bozer, who early on realized that we need active, engaged citizens like all of you today to be vigilant, because these great spaces are constantly threatened. We're seeing in city after city buildings being suggested, all of them with good purposes, but being suggested as something that need to go into public spaces and parks. And so it's really incumbent on all of us to band together to make certain that we can protect these great spaces that Olmsted made possible for us, because once gone, they typically are gone forever. So with that, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for coming, everyone. We hope to see you for our future programs. And thanks once again to Clinton for a fantastic program and a really wonderful book. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.